PFF lists Texas A&M receiver KC Concepcion as a top 10 wideout for the 2025 season.
You are Locked On Aggies, your daily podcast on the Texas A&M Aggies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on into Locked On Aggies. I'm your host, Andrew Stefaniak. Thanks for making Locked On Aggies your first listen every single day. On the show today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk a little bit about the Mississippi State basketball game. We're going to talk about a list that came out that gave a ranking for every SEC schedule next year, hardest to easiest, which there's no such thing as an easy one in the SEC, and we'll get to that. But we're going to start the show talking about a list from Pro Football Focus that had to do with some of the best receivers in college football for next season. And there is a new face for the Aggies that made the cut. On the show today, we were going to do something with Brian Smith. We did record that yesterday. It was on his show, but we went a little shorter than I expected. And so I'm going to post that as a bonus show later in the week. So it's not going to be one of our normal Monday through Friday shows. It'll be a little bonus extra episode this week. So we'll post that probably on Friday, maybe on Saturday. But to get right on into this, KC Concepcion is going to be an elite receiver for this Texas A&M football team. We all agree with that. We all know that. When you turn on the film for what he did last year at NC State, it was just really impressive. And in all honesty, what he did the year before that was even better. I mean, we'll pull up the numbers on Concepcion, but he's a guy that is going to come in and immediately make Texas A&M's wide receiver room, which was a concern, is a concern, going to make it a lot better. So last year, he catches 53 passes for 460 yards, 6 touchdowns. He also runs the ball for 19 times for 36 yards and 2 scores. In 2023, he catches 71 passes for 839 yards, 10 touchdowns, also ran the ball 41 times for 320 yards. So over 1,000 yards combined between rushing and receiving, 10 touchdowns. He's got 18 total career touchdowns between rushing and receiving. And just a guy that I anticipate being a star for this team. So a list came out. It was the top 10 receivers next year for college football. Number 1, no surprise, Jeremiah Smith. We can all, no disagreeing with that. Kid's special. Next, we got Ryan Williams, Alabama, once again. No debate, kid's special. Then we got Jordan Tyson over at Arizona State. Great player, no surprise. Elijah Stewart over at Indiana. No surprise, great player. Eric Singleton Jr. over at Auburn, a kid that came over from Georgia Tech. And then Cam Coleman, the kid that we all know that he's going to be a sophomore at Auburn this year, a kid that was committed to Texas A&M for a few months, ends up going over there playing for the Auburn Tigers. Then Bryant Westco Jr. at Clemson is going to be a kid that is going to have a pretty darn good season. Then at number 8, KC Concepcion. Here's the blurb on him. It says, after a down sophomore season at NC State, Concepcion will start fresh with the Aggies. It's still hard to call a season where he had, 460 yards, and quarterback play was an issue. They had some injuries there. I understand calling it down compared to what he did the year before, but I don't know if it was fully on him. But after a down sophomore season, NC State, Concepcion will start fresh with the Aggies. He still deserves a place on this list for his 2-year production as far since 2023. His 792 yards after the catch are the second most among returning Power 4 receivers. After his 16 receiving touchdowns, and his 16 receiving touchdowns are the most. Concepcion's 357 rushing yards in that span ranked 3rd among wide receivers. He's an electric player with the ball in his hands who should be utilized much more in Texas A&M's offense. Then number 9, you got Mekhi Lemon over at USC and Eugene Wilson, the great receiver over there at Florida. Then the honorable mention was Malachi Fields over at Notre Dame, who came over from Virginia. So, agree. That's a great list, I think. Actually, a really good list. And I mean, there's going to be some star receivers in college football next year. I think we can all agree on that. But Concepcion, one of the keys here, and it's something that we've talked about, we've harped on for a while now, and so you sound like a broken record when I talk about this, but he is the what we're going to see out of KC Concepcion is going to depend heavily on what happens with the Aggies starting quarterback Marcel Reed. We need to see Reed have that season we all believe he can have. We need to see him develop as a passer. It would be, if I'm KC Concepcion, a kid that, incredible after the catch, we all believe that he's going to be an NFL player. If I'm him, I'm not going to Texas A&M if this staff hasn't convinced me how much better Marcel Reed's going to be next year. You don't want to be that player that was really good and then transfers. And once again, he's different than your normal really good player because he's coming over from NC State. He's not coming over from a small school. He wasn't doing this at a really small school and then coming over to the Power 4 level, and you're like, oh, darn, okay, so he's an okay player, but he's not as good as we thought. No, he is a really incredible, all-around incredible football player that we have seen at this level, at the Power 4 level, in the ACC. So I'm not worried about his skill set transferring to the ACC. I think he's going to be great. But I would like to see, now let's see, did he play any SEC schools last year? Let's see. They played Tennessee and he had 5 catches for 53 yards. So, was in the bowl game now. So yeah, he's proven he can do this against solid teams. Let's see, in 2023, did he have a good game against any SEC schools? He did have 6 catches for 63 yards and 4 carries, 43 yards for 33 yards against Coach Elko's Duke Blue Devils. No SEC schools that year though, but still, I think that adding these two factors together, adding how good of a season I think Marcel Reed's going to have on top of how good of a player I think KC Concepcion is, I think that he's going to have an 1,000-yard season. And I just don't, Evan Stewart, you know what I mean? Some of these guys, no disrespect to him, I think who we thought he was going to be, he wasn't that. And I think KC Concepcion is going to be the receiver that Texas A&M fans have been hoping to see since some of these guys, since your Mike Evans of the world and your Kirks and your Reynolds of the world that are now all playing professional football. I think he's going to be that next guy. I think he's going to be that next guy that is absolutely incredible. And I think he could have an 1,000-yard season. He proved he could get darn close. He had 840 yards in 23. If you add the rushing yards he did, he had a 1,000-yard season all purpose. But I think that for those that go, well, who's this KC Concepcion kid on this top 10 list? He's a stud. And I think that he is 100% deserving of this ranking. I think that he's going to have a season that is going to be hard to forget as a Texas A&M fan. I think that you're going to see him continue to get better this year. I think that the SEC isn't going to be a challenge for him. I think he's going to have a season where everyone sits back and goes, man, that kid's great. And yeah, I think he's going to be he's like a basketball player for us. I think he's going to be a one and done. He's going to be in and out. Like the burger. I think he's gone. I think he's going to be here for 1 year and he's going to go on and be a late day 1, early day 2 pick in the NFL draft. So now a lot of, and you hate putting this all on Marcel Reed, but a lot of the upside of KC Concepcion, he can't throw himself the football as much as I'm sure he'd like to. He cannot throw himself the football. Marcel Reed's got to get the ball to him. I would feel terrible for the kid if KC Concepcion came over here and didn't produce because and kind of he's open and we can't get it to him because of the quarterback play. So Marcel Reed needs to help this kid out because once again, KC Concepcion is an NFL talent, and this staff and this, you need to be able to get him the ball. So really want to see the Texas A&M coaching staff continue to develop Marcel Reed and find a way to get him the rock because, yeah, I think that's going to have a significantly important role in his development. So that is my take on this. I agree. I think it's a great list. Great list top to bottom. I agree with everything on there, but I think it's great to see Concepcion receiving some preseason praise that I think he deserves. So according to PFF, KC Concepcion is a top 10 receiver for next season. An article came out previewing the schedules for all of the SEC teams and kind of ranked them hardest to easiest. We're going to talk about where the Aggies land on that list, and we'll do it coming up right here on Locked On Aggies. But first, I got to tell you about our wonderful friends over at TurboTax. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was dealing with piles of paperwork and frustrating forms, and then waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. Now Taxes is easily uploading your forms to a TurboTax expert who's matched to your unique tax situation. An expert who's backed by the latest technology, which cross-checks millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on your taxes, you get real-time updates on their progress, and you get the most money back guaranteed, all while you go about your day. No stressing, no worrying, no waiting. Now this is Taxes Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. So this list came out, and this is an interesting list. I like this a lot. It is a list breaking down it's from Athlon, breaking down the rankings of SEC schools. And when you take a look at this, you've got, when it comes to strength of schedule. So number 1 is Missouri. Number 2 is Ole Miss. Number 3 is Tennessee. Number 4 is Auburn. Number 5 is Texas. Number 6 is LSU. Number 7, South Carolina. Number 8 is Alabama. Number 9 is Georgia. Number 10 is where Texas A&M sits. Here's what the blurb on this says. Unlike last season, the Aggies start the 2025 campaign with 2 games against Group of 5 foes. However, Texas A&M travels to South Bend in Week 3 to take on Notre Dame. The national championship runner-up, the Fighting Irish, kicked the 2024 season off with a win in College Station, so Mike Echo will be looking to return the favor in the fall. The rematch is the Aggies' only road trip in their first 6 games, though they do host Auburn and Florida during that stretch. Beginning with the mid-October trip to Arkansas, Texas A&M is on the road for 4 of its final 6 games, which is scary. Trips to LSU, Missouri, Texas, South Carolina also comes to town in November, which will be a tough month for A&M. I mean, I think that's a great thing, great way to discuss the strength of schedule here for the Aggies, and we've talked about it. And that's why it's ranked 10th, not 16th. You know, this is a tough schedule. This is by no means an easy schedule for this football team, but it is a schedule that I think is quite manageable, not as manageable as last year, but the argument I continue to make is you don't play Ole Miss, you don't play Alabama, you don't play Georgia, you don't play some of these great teams. I mean, I think when the preseason SEC lists come out, yeah, without question, Texas will be up there. LSU will probably be up there. South Carolina maybe, but like those teams in Ole Miss and Alabama and Georgia that are all going to be in that top 5, probably top 6 for sure, you don't have to play them. So you have a tough schedule, but it could be a lot worse if you flipped an Auburn for a Georgia and a Mississippi State for an Ole Miss. Then we're talking about going, oh man, can the Aggies make a bowl game? So I think that's why the 10th overall ranking is fair for this team. It's just a flip-flop of last year. Your schedule last year was much more manageable. You went to go play games on the road at South Carolina and Auburn and Mississippi State that we thought were all going to be in Florida. You know, we're going to be more cakewalks. I think Florida at the time was, Mississippi State was, but, you know, obviously you lose South Carolina and Auburn. They played good football in those 2 games. So that flips. Now those guys are coming to you, and you've got to go on the road and play LSU and play Arkansas that's no longer in Jerry's world. And you got to go play Missouri on the road. So, you know, and of course you got to go to Austin to take on the Longhorns. This is not an easy schedule for the Aggies. It's going to be tough to find a way to succeed with this schedule. I mean, but at the end of the day, it could be a lot worse, which is why we're not going to sit here and make excuses. We're not going to sit here and say, hey, you know what? I think, I don't think we should be too worried about this ball game. I don't think we should be too worried about this schedule. It's really tough. The Aggies are going to have a tough go of it here. And, but I still think that we shouldn't be throwing in the hat and saying, well, we're not making the playoff. I think that we can't be a program with all this talent that we have on our roster that's going to sit back and say, you know what? Schedule's a little too tough this year. We're just going to hope it's a little bit easier next year. I'm sure it'll be better next year. We're not worried about this year. We'll pack it in, right? You cannot do that. You can't do it. I think that you have to approach this year saying it's playoff or bust, despite the schedule being harder than it was last year. Because I think you're better this year than you were. You hammered receiver in the portal. You're added some good players in your secondary. You do lose great players in your defensive line. There's no question there. But you return your offensive line. I think this Texas A&M offense is going to be something we haven't seen since a guy named Mike Evans and Johnny Manziel were here. Seriously, I think it can be that special because of how good I think Marcel Reed's going to be. Now, the offense is not going to be what it was with Evans and Johnny Manziel. I'm not saying that, but I do think it can be one of the better offenses we've seen in a long time at Texas A&M. I agree with that, to where you're going to see them continue to get better with how good this offense is. You have elite running backs. You have elite receivers. You have a great offensive line. You brought in a ton of good tight ends. You got a really high upside guy at tight end in Amari Niblack, and Cody Armstrong's guy who I think is going to be great. You got a great room. You've got a great tight end room. You've got a great receiver room, great running back room, offensive line that could be one of the best in the SEC. It's all going to come down to Marcel Reed. Marcel Reed's good. This offense, I think, is one of the best offenses in the SEC and probably a top 10 offense in college football. Then it's going to come down to your defense, which, you got to improve the secondary. You got to replace Shamar Turner, Shamar Stewart, Nick Scorton. There's a lot you have to do. So it will be interesting to see how this defense is going to be next year. But I mean, when you look at this schedule, I think that's the way I look at it. You can't sit here and say it's easy. I mean, now, but it's also not the toughest schedule this year. If y'all remember right, Florida's was tough last year. Mississippi State's got a tough go of it this year. At Southern Miss versus Arizona State versus Alcorn State versus a Northern Illinois team that beat Notre Dame last year versus Tennessee, at A&M, at Florida versus Texas, at Arkansas versus Georgia, at Missouri versus Ole Miss. I mean, that is a tough schedule. I mean, you're playing – I would say that if the top 5 teams in the SEC are probably not in any order: Texas, Ole Miss, Georgia, Alabama. I think Tennessee's up there. And I mean, look who you're playing: Tennessee, Georgia, Ole Miss, Texas. I mean, this is not. It's not an easy schedule. So I think the Aggies are fortunate with the schedule that they have. I think that they are going to be able to. And I think that 10th overall ranking is fair when it comes to the strength of schedule, because it's not easy, but there's harder ones. So I think that's a fair ranking for the Aggies. I think that's a very fair ranking. I really want to see this team continue to get better and better to be able to live up to the hype of this schedule, because it will be harder. You have to be better. If you want to win 9 or 10 football games, you have to be better than you were last year, because the schedule is harder. So do y'all agree with that strength of schedule being 10th in the SEC? Should it be higher? Should it be lower? What do y'all think on the schedule? Let me know in the YouTube comments. We are going to preview the Aggies' massive matchup with the Mississippi State Bulldogs. If the Aggies want to be a top 4 seed in the SEC tournament and a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament, this is the type of game you have got to go on the road and win. We are going to talk about it. We are going to preview it coming up right here on Locked On Aggies. So the Aggies are getting ready to, well, they've already made the trip to Starkville, Mississippi to take on the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Mississippi State is a basketball team that I think is at the same time over and underrated, but I think it's a team that I think that Texas A&M is incredibly consistent. You know who's going to show up. You know how they're going to play pretty much every single night. Mississippi State, you don't know which version of them is going to show up. They've got a player in Josh Hubbard who is one of my favorite players in the SEC because of the way he plays the game. He is the gunslinging quarterback when it comes to a college basketball player. He lets it fly. I mean, he shoots the ball. Like, listen to his last, like I said, in his last handful of games, he scored 38, 24, 16, 19, and 14 points. In those games, he shot the ball 28, 13, 14, 15, 13 times a game. I mean, he is absolutely letting the ball fly. And he should be. I mean, listen to three-pointers. Attempts per game. 8, 12, 8, 11, 15, 9, 12, 10, 11. I mean, he lets this thing fly. And he's a great player. He should be letting it fly. He's the best player they have. I do think that Mississippi State is a team that kind of their success depends on the play of Josh Hubbard. When he is shooting the ball well, they can beat anybody, and I mean absolutely anybody, in college basketball. When he is not shooting the ball well, they can lose to absolutely anybody in college basketball. So if you're a Mississippi State fan, you want to see Josh Hubbard show up and play good basketball in this game. If you're a Texas A&M fan, you want this to be one of the games where he just goes 1 of 15 from the field and really is on the struggle bus. They're a team kind of like Texas A&M as a whole who does not necessarily shoot the three ball all that well at 31.5%. They also, like Texas A&M, do not shoot the free throws well. Texas A&M and Mississippi State, I think, are actually incredibly similar basketball teams. I mean, you've got some great high volume, high intensity guards and some great rebounders in all over the court. There are some really good players all around on this team. And, you know, I think that this is going to be a tougher game to go on the road than many imagine. And I mean, I believe that's why this is, you know, Mississippi State's 2.5-point favorite in this game. If I was betting, I would take Texas A&M to win. I think they're going to win tonight. I do. I'm going to pick us to win, but it's not going to be easy. You've got to defend Josh Hubbard well. You've got two small guards in Wade Taylor and Josh Hubbard guarding one another. They play the game the exact same way. They need to cancel one another out. That's how you win. Or if you want to win, Taylor's got to outplay Hubbard or they got to cancel out. Because I think you're better around Wade Taylor than they are around Hubbard. If you play well around Wade Taylor, who has a good game, I think you win this game. If Wade Taylor has a 1 for 17 game and Josh Hubbard scores 27 points on 13 for 17 shooting, the Aggies are going to lose tonight. That's the reality. So that's what has to happen for Texas A&M to win. I think they're going to win. I'm picking them to win. But this is a big game. If you want to be a top 4 seed in Nashville and you want to be a number 2 seed in the NCAA tournament, this is a game that I think you're going to have to go win. That is going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Aggies. Thank you all so much for being here every single day. I really, really appreciate it. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button on YouTube. It helps the show out a lot. If you're listening on a podcast platform, leave a 5-star review. Helps the show out a lot. Really, really appreciate all you everydayers here being here, tuning in. Hope everyone has a great rest of their day today, and we'll see you tomorrow right here on Locked On Aggies.